Thank you so much for joining us, Tristan. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Super curious to have this conversation with you, and I'm sure our audience is gonna love it too. But I would love to start from the beginning, if that's okay with you. Um, Tell us who you are. Tell us who you are
Yes, of
and how you
course.
got to where you are today.
Yes, great to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. I'm Tristan Pineiro. I currently head up comms and marketing at Grindr. I've been here for nearly a couple of years. I've been in the comms and brand and marketing industry for a very long time. I I kind of fell into it by accident, really. I studied linguistics and language at university, and I did that for 4 years in Manchester in the early 90s in the UK. Had the best time ever. I was working in nightclubs and bars at the time, and it was a brilliant time to be there. There was so much excitement and new music and culture, and there was this, it was palpable. Manchester was the place to be. I was very lucky. But because of that, I wasn't really paying that much attention to what I was going to do when it all ended. So I always thought that speaking languages was kind of going to get me through. Um, I'm originally from Menorca in Spain, so I grew up speaking English and Spanish and Catalan. Then I went on to learn French and Italian and bits and bobs of other languages. And everyone had always said to me, "Oh, you speak languages, you'll be fine. You've got languages." And then when I started looking for jobs, they were like, "Yes, you can speak languages, but what can you actually do?" And I was like, I don't know what I can actually do, really. That's a very good question, other than talk and communicate. So the first job I got was actually working for a bank. I did that thing when uh, big corporations go to universities to recruit people, and I was a bit, yeah, not, I don't really know what I'm going to do. So a friend of mine went to a bank recruiting fair, and I ended up getting the graduate recruitment job, and he didn't, which was a bit awkward. But I literally lasted 3 months, and I thought, no, this is absolutely not for me.
Mm.
This is killing my spirit a bit. And then a friend of mine said, "Well, why don't you continue doing communications?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm trying to do that, but no one's really that interested." And whilst I'd been at uni, I'd been working in nightclubs and helping to promote them and getting people there and stuff. And someone said, "Well, that's PR. You've been doing PR. Why don't you do that?" And so I kind of took it from there, really, and had various agency and in-house and internal comms roles, mainly in communications, working for some great agencies with some great clients, international clients. Uh, Great experience. And then not that long ago, moved into marketing and brand marketing. I'm one of those rare people that comes from comms into marketing. And yeah, I'm still loving it 30 years later.
Do you feel like it, my experience as somebody that, has lived in different countries and in places where there are places where I literally didn't speak the language when I moved there. Um, but I've always felt like, being able to navigate these different cultures and different languages and things, like even if you suck, I consider myself somebody that now sucks in four languages. Like even my native Portuguese is suffering from this mix of
Oh, that's sure that's not
different
okay.
experiences. But even if that's the case, like I feel like language became a way to read people in a different way.
Mm.
So even if I don't fully understand the language or fully, I'm not able to fully speak a language sometimes. I feel like maybe because of that, actually, like it forced me to read people in a different way. You know what I mean? It forced me to pay attention to other signals, other forms of communication, body language, whatever it is that you want to call it, like just cultural behaviors, cultural patterns, in a way that, consciously or unconsciously sometimes affect the way I work, the way I do my job as a creative. Like, do you feel the same way? Like, do you feel like your background in languages impacts your marketing
Yes,
job?
yes, very much so. And
Mm.
I think, at a very basic level, you don't need to know much about languages to know that when you translate stuff, you don't translate word for word. There's different sentence constructions, verb constructions, all kinds of stuff. And I think it just teaches you to think. differently and to ask questions differently and to not assume that the way that things have been done is going to be the way that they're always done and is necessarily the right way to do things. And that is where my linguistics and language background, very much to your point, has shaped the way that I think about things. I always think about what does this actually mean
Hmm.
rather than how am I going to say it and
Hmm.
why does it matter and how does this execution make people feel maybe slightly differently from that one. I think the nuance of language where you can just change an intonation or change one word or move a sentence around a little bit, I think opens up your brain to doing stuff differently. So yeah, I
Yeah,
totally agree.
I love it.
It's been really useful.
It's funny how it becomes sort of a superpower, right? How, a lot of our jobs is us trying to sort of tap into an aspect of humanity that
Yeah,
sometimes, most of the time, is unspoken, right? And there's something about being the outsider and literally, sometimes literally not speaking the language
yeah.
that kind of opens another way to tap into that I find, it's a creative superpower sometimes.
And because
Yeah.
you have to think about different ways of saying things as
Mhm.
well,
Yeah, it forces you to be
to
very
it,
concise. It forces you to be a lot more instinctive about the way you communicate or the way you like go about just trying to find an idea that, sometimes feels very individual, very unique, but that's how I think you find the universal stories at the same time. So there's a lot of it that
absolutely.
I think, in a way, in a counterintuitive way, sometimes kind of helps us as marketing folks, right?
It teaches you how
Mhm.
to explain things a lot
Yeah.
better because sometimes you have to really explain things well because you just don't know the actual words.
Yeah.
And so it's a skill
Do you
that's
find that it
useful.
makes you more creative as well?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about your current job. Like, I think your background is so interesting, and I'm so curious to hear how it impacts your current role. Can you tell us more about your current role?
Yeah, so I head up marketing, brand marketing, product marketing, um, all the usual stuff, and communications at Grindr, which is a dream job for me, to be perfectly honest. I'd worked in dating before, and it's just a gift of a topic, to be perfectly honest, because when you think about it, every story, every poem, every song, every film, every work of art has human relationships at the heart of it. And when your product is about facilitating human relationships from a storyteller point of view, it's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah.
And with Grindr, add on the layer of the homosexual element to it as well, and where that is culturally, globally, locally, and again, different societal, political, cultural religious aspects come into it as well. We're in 190 countries. So the way that we turn up in those countries and the way that we're perceived and the way that we're used is completely different. Um, and I've started out really focusing on the US, but we're turning our attention a lot more to where we are internationally because I mean, it's an incredible success story. It's been around for 16 years. It was one of the first location-based apps in the App Store. And it's really grown pretty much through word of mouth, through having first mover advantage, through having everyone there. Um, and people have been using it in many different ways, which weren't necessarily its intended use case when it was designed. And so paying attention to a lot of those has been really interesting. So yeah, we're doing a lot of cool stuff. Got a great team, and I'm loving it so far.
Can you give us some examples of those? Where people like this whole show is about creativity, but sometimes creativity manifests itself in ways that were not necessarily the way we intended, right? So can you give us some examples of people using the app in ways that were not intended initially and how you adapted to that?
Yeah. So Grindr was created as a app for the gay community in 2009. Um, and through default rather than by design, has become the premier connection point for the gay, bi, trans, and queer population globally. really because there's nowhere else
Hmm.
for that to happen. Um, and much as it's viewed as just a hookup app, and the problem that I have with that sentence isn't the word hookup, it's the word just. Um, but much as people think of it as that, our users have kind of hacked the app for other use cases. So they use it to find not just hookups, but love, relationships, friendship, information, um, sexual health information, safety information, travel information. And that was something that for a while was just there, that the community were using the app for these reasons, even though we hadn't really built the product around it. So in the last couple of years, we've been really paying attention to that and realizing that, like I say, we've by default we've become the global gayborhood, in that we are the place where the community comes together. Absolutely for sex. Sex is always going to be there, and it should be. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it's between consenting adults and everybody's happy. Absolutely. But paying attention to the other use cases like travel. 25% of people using Grindr are traveling at any one time. So we're looking at how do we develop the product more to aid this from a translation, from a localization, from a having features in there that help you while you're traveling. And we've been creating content around that as well to show people that actually the way you're using it is legitimate because there's always a bit of stigma around
Hmm.
Grindr, where often the butt, no pun intended, of the joke, and um, and so we're kind of in some cases leaning into that, in some cases messaging against it, because if you are in a committed monogamous relationship and you're on Grindr, people are, oh, what are you doing on Grindr? What's going on there? But there are other genuine use cases that we're working towards legitimizing a bit more, so that
Love
that
it.
stigma isn't there.
Love it. First of all, I forgot to say this, but I'm speaking as somebody that has been off the apps, as they say, for the last 6 years, 7 years, and I feel like the dating scene in general has changed completely in that period, right? Um, and I remember back then when I was on the apps, there were maybe like 3 or 4 main apps, and now there seems to be a different app for every community, to every niche, like every religion, every ethnicity, every
Yeah,
location. Like there's something for everyone. How do you stay on top of all that? How do you use creativity to kind of, get ahead of all that and not the changing landscape, not only the dating landscape, but even the tech landscape itself, like with other players coming in? Like, how do you use creativity to just show up in an interesting, engaging,
yeah.
relevant way for the community?
I think it's about being open about what we really are
Mm.
and being true to ourselves and celebrating the fact that everybody really is on Grindr, whether it's at their as their within the community, of course, whether if it's as their primary app or as their secondary app. Um, because people do play around with different
Mm,
apps
mm,
as an ex-user, I'm sure you know. And really leaning into the truth of who we are. For a while, we were maybe in danger of trying to be something that we're not. And I think that sometimes can happen with some of the competition. All the figures show that the majority of people in a relationship have met online these days, and it's the truth of it. So that stigma isn't there in the way that it used to be, but with Grindr, it still is because it's more about sex and it's about gay sex, and those are things that, like it or not, people just don't want to think about and don't want to talk about. So I think by remaining true to our roots, but also paying attention to, like I say, to all the other possibilities that are out there. Like I was mentioning, travel. We have this travel series called Host or Travel, which is an episodic series on YouTube with lots of different social cut downs, and we aim to get it to get press coverage as well, which is showcasing the real use case of people going to a new location, either wanting to meet other people for an encounter, for a relationship, for friendship, but also to get information. Where are the bars? Where's the gay beach? What gay hotels are going to let me have a double bed with my partner? Where are the areas I should stay away from? Where's dangerous? So by providing entertaining content that talks to a real use case that is happening, but that not everyone is necessarily talking about, and doing that in a way that is offering information is one of the creative ways in which we're doing that.
I love that. I imagine that even, for example, you mentioned that you're present in 190 countries. Like, I
Yeah,
imagine that your message has to be tailored to, especially countries, societies where perhaps they're a little less welcoming to the community, that your message has to change pretty dramatically, right? How does that work?
100%. So
Mm,
we're in 190 countries, and in more than 60 of those, it's actually still illegal to be
mm,
gay, would you believe? And some people say, well, why are you there? Aren't you putting people in danger? And we have a lot of ongoing conversations with local groups and NGOs and human rights associations. And the resounding answer is always absolutely, you need to be here because you're providing a lifeline to people who otherwise would be totally isolated. If you live in New York or San Francisco or LA, you can go to a neighborhood, and you can find community, you can find everything that you're looking for. If you live in a country where there is acceptance and we are legal, again, you can live pretty much normal lives. There's still problems. However, if you're in one of those 60 countries, people can't even talk about it in public. So even stuff like health information, safety information can't be published and can't be publicized because the people doing so would get into trouble. So through our Grinder for Equality arm, which is going to be 10 years old this year, we work with a whole raft of international organizations whereby we will use the app to give out safety information, to give health information, to provide all kinds of resources that otherwise these NGOs would have no way of reaching the community. And, in conversations that we have with them, um, it's an absolute lifeline. So the way that we talk about ourselves there, of course, is very different, and the way that we turn up in the App Store is very different. We're about connection, we're about community. There's a small number of countries where we've actually been banned, and however, if we're unbanned, then we definitely would be returning because we know
mhm.
that what we can offer is highly valuable
That's
to the
incredible.
community there.
That's incredible. And obviously we use the word community a lot in this context, which makes sense for a platform like Grindr, but it seems to be sort of like a common thread. All the conversations that we had in this podcast so far, and we talked to other tech platforms, we talked to toilet paper, the professionals, we talked to people that work on
Did you
luxury
just say toilet?
watches,
You just said toilet paper professionals,
everything
didn't you?
from,
I
yeah,
love that.
the somebody that works for a toilet paper company to somebody that works on other tech brands and somebody that works in like gaming industry, for example, and community always comes up. So it seems
Yeah.
to be more and more important for brands these days to build sort of their own community. And obviously, again, it comes very natural to a brand like Grindr, but what do you think other brands can learn from it? Like what are some of the things that you guys do that you feel like other marketeers out there, other brands can learn from and implement on their day-to-day?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is all about community, and it's about really taking the time and effort to be in that community and to find out what they're doing, what they're thinking, what's important to them, what are the trends that they're jumping on, what are the issues that they're worried about, um, because that ultimately your community ends up being your brand, and being in culture and conversation is a two-way thing in that if we're reflecting our community and they're engaging with us, then that becomes our cultural currency. um, and I always think that a lot of brands try to be something that they're not.
Hmm.
And I think ultimately that's a mistake. I think you can absolutely change perception of a brand. You can absolutely move a brand in a different direction, but you have to take people with you and it has to be credible. And the only way that you can do that is by just really putting the time and effort to being in the forums, to having focus groups, to going out and meeting the people wherever they may be. My team are terminally online, uh, all over all the different platforms, the emerging ones, the established ones, as well as going out, as well as being in the community, as well as using the app, whether they're app users or not. And you can't replace that. You as a marketer, you have to be in the community. Even if you don't use that toilet paper, even if you don't use the app, you have to be there and you have to have those conversations because otherwise you're going to miss the nuance. It's going back to the language thing that we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier. You just slightly talking the wrong language um, is it's gonna show and it's gonna come across as inauthentic.
Yeah, especially like it's so easy to spot brands that are trying too hard, right? And you just said the
Yeah.
word authentic, like authenticity. And this minute we start talking about community, the word authenticity usually comes up too, and um, it's so crucial, right? So, and I think that's also it's important. The other thing that you mentioned too, that I think is two things that I think lead to excellence these days, in my opinion, is this sense of authenticity. Like what can a brand do that only that brand could do, like, and say it in a way that only that brand can say it to an audience that they can reach in a way that no other brand can reach. That's one. But I think like it also comes from a strong sense of partnership that you have with your team, with your vendors, with the agency that you work with, and everybody that's involved in that process of creating that authenticity, right? So you mentioned your team. I'd love to hear more about how you go about assembling your team, whether that's internally or externally. What are some of the things that you look for when you're choosing the right people to partner with?
Yeah. The first criteria is we don't take any assholes. So people, let's be honest, there's a lot of brilliant jerks in the industry, and we all know them, and we've all worked with them. And I'm kind of hoping they're a dying breed. I don't know. I think they're. I don't think they get away with it in the way that maybe they did a few years ago. So the number one is that they are nice people, that obviously they are smart and intelligent, and that they really care passionately about what they're doing. You'd be amazed at how many people I interview that I ask them about the app and they haven't downloaded it. And that is obviously the first thing that you need to do. To what we were talking about previously, you have to, even if you're not a member of the community, even if you're not interested, even if you don't get it, you have to learn.
Yeah, you
You
have to be
have to
curious about it.
research. Of course you
Yeah.
do. Of course you do. And curious is a great word.
Hmm.
Being eternally curious about stuff, um, to come up with different solutions, different ways of thinking about it. Um, there's there's a great combination of uh, high levels of common sense, high levels of intelligence, but also an incredible amount of brain rot. Uh, Devouring popular culture on a daily basis. What's the latest trend? What could be the new trend? Who is breaking the internet right now is essential, I think, to be ahead of stuff like this. Not necessarily to always jump on the trend, because sometimes it's a bit too late by the time you've done it, because it moves at lightning speed. My team always say the internet moves fast, the gay internet moves twice as fast. By the time you've noticed something, it's probably too late. But understanding what the trends are and being able to forecast actually where might that land, and aiming for a couple of steps ahead of it rather than where it did land.
I love that. And I think everything that you're saying about the people that you choose to surround yourself with and all that, I think it reminds me of something that you said in the past that I'm looking at my notes here because I want to make sure that I'm representing it right. But you mentioned three brand truths, right?
Yes.
Who you say you are, who people say you are, and who you really are. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think
Yes.
it connects to everything that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned this from I used to work in this agency called Three Monkeys that was started by Angie Moxham, who became a bit of a mentor to me. And this was the Three Monkeys philosophy. Um, she tells me it comes from from Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, I don't know, I've never looked it up. Maybe someone listening can correct me. I have a strong suspicion it actually comes from Kung Fu Panda, but let's say it comes from Buddhism. And that is that, for yourself, you will reach nirvana when who you really are, who you say you are, and who people see are the same thing. And that stands for brands as well. You know, who you really are is what service you provide, what your functionality is, why you're necessary, different, unique, useful, good, quality, affordable, whatever all of those things are what the truth of what you are and the brand essence. How you present yourself, which is the marketing, which is the who you say you are, and who your customers think you are. You'd be surprised how often those things, and in places, well, at brands that I've worked for, agency side, how often those things are three completely different buckets of
Mhm.
thing. People will think you are a certain type of brand. You will say you are this highly aspirational brand, and the truth of what you really are is something completely different. So really paying attention to those three things and being fastidious about bringing those three things to overlap as much as possible. It's never going to be perfect because there are some things that you're just not going to talk about. There are some things that your audience might not necessarily care about, but that's important to you as a business. There's always going to be outliers. It's never going to be a perfect Venn diagram. But the closer you can align those by showing vulnerability sometimes as well and being truthful about who you are, um, is how through Angie I go about all my brand work. And it's kind of the first three questions that I will ask everyone in an organization where I am. What do you think we do? How do you talk about that? And what do people think you do?
Love that. And for a brand like Grindr, um, the communication, I guess, is very social first, right? How do you reconcile those values with a social first world where, sometimes a lot of it is out of your control, right? Do you
Yes.
just kind of like, do you just force yourself to just be okay with the fact that it's out of your control, or there's things you can do to
You
drive that
have to.
narrative in the direction that is important for you and for your brand?
You have to come to terms with the fact that there's always going to be things that are out of your control. But I do think that, for a brand like Grindr, it makes sense to be content and social first. Um, and the way that I'm shaping it is to be very open about who we are and the huge possibilities of who we can become. So we have a podcast that's doing really well called Who's the Arsehole, which is hosted by Katia, who is an incredible host. And this was very much based on those three truths. So, you know, um, not just Grindr, a lot of this is Grindr, but dating apps in general get tarred with being the home of bad behaviors. So the Who's the Arsehole podcast was very much based on that, very much, an open palm is the tightest grip type mentality. That if we actually talk about these behaviors and talk about why they happen and get to the root cause of it and be honest about the fact that they're happening and maybe try to explore the why they're happening, all the time doing it in a with comedy and lightheartedness and getting the right voices on there to talk about this, then it has proved that it's done a lot for us because it shows that we're joining in the conversation rather than, to your point earlier, of just ignoring it and hoping it will go away. But by actually joining in the conversation and owning some of it and talking about it openly, um, we're encouraging more people to have that dialogue. The Am I the Arsehole was a huge Reddit thread that you probably know about.
Mhm.
So we based a lot of it on there. And we chose Katia, who is famous from RuPaul's Drag Race, Katia and Trixie double act. But we specifically wanted her out of drag to show her vulnerability.
Love it.
And she's been very open about her mental health struggles and her addiction struggles. And we all have messy, complicated lives. And she brings so much humanity and humor and humility to it and brings the best out of the majority of the guests. Some people are quite guarded because they they have agents and managers who get nervous about a lot of these conversations. But the best ones and the most successful ones have been the ones that have been completely unfiltered,
I think
where
that's a
we
great
just owned
story.
that.
I, my personal opinion, I feel like brands in general can learn so much from that in the age of, to your point, like there's no real space. I like to believe, just like you, that there's not a lot of space for assholes anymore in our industry. But I think if you elevate it to the brand level, I think it's similar in the sense that, we do live in an age of, or at least the work that I tend to relate with or to gravitate towards is a work that has an element of self-awareness, right? That you mentioned like empathy and all those things. Um, but I feel like there's still a lot of brands out there that still see that as risky, right? They're still
Yeah.
trying very hard to like control the narrative a certain way, or sometimes make the mistake of what I consider a mistake. Maybe it works for certain brands, but in general, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but I think there's this misconception that you can just like sometimes you feel like the brand are just regurgitating their own agenda onto an audience as opposed to really trying to engage in a dialogue and a conversation where and sometimes it's going to be imperfect and that's okay. But what do you think? So let's talk about that notion of risk, like, and the risk of doing something like that and maybe being flexible with your brand and how it shows up in the world versus the risk of not doing that. You know what I mean? Like the
Mm.
risk of showing up as a stiff brand that is not participating in a cultural dialogue. Like, how do you balance those two worlds?
I mean, I guess it depends on the brand as well. I mean,
Mm,
some brands obviously for all kinds of reasons need to be more careful, I guess. Uh, I do think that I do think the fashion industry is waking up to it and getting it a lot better. Um, and taking a lot more of those risks and being part of those conversations and examining themselves a lot more. I think I think sometimes you see brands doing it. There's an insurance brand that's on television at the moment that's trying to do that, and I think failing because they're
mm,
trying to be self-deprecating and it just feels a bit awkward. It feels a little
mm.
bit dad at a disco. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of
Yeah.
like we're trying to be cool.
Mm,
So I think it very much to your earlier question, it very much depends on who the audiences are as well.
mm,
And I think the brands really need to understand their audiences and take the risks that they should already know their audiences are open to. I mean, I'm very lucky with Grindr in that we are synonymous with gay sex, and if you can't have fun with that, then what can you have fun with? Um, so and we do push the envelope, and we are cheeky and sexy and naughty and all of that, and that is to advance the brand. But that is also, to advance our mission. The mere fact of Grindr existing is a political statement.
mm-hmm.
The fact that we're here and that we're in so many of those countries is a statement in itself, and it's a statement of progress. And and we believe that by being noticed and making a point about who we are, but doing it in an entertaining and cheeky and engaging way is elevating our brand to take our rightful place on the global stage. And by doing so, and by being this big gay company that's on the New York Stock Exchange, that's bucking the industry trend and doing really well, we can actually elevate the presence and the lives of our community.
I love that. Here at Gray, we have our global CCO, Gab, who always talks about how for him, there are no crazy ideas, really. There are ideas that are on strategy and off strategy. And that's sometimes as simple as that, so to your point, like as long as you're doing something that feels true to the
Yeah,
brand, that is part of your goals, that you believe is going to bring growth to the company and that's going to resonate with the audience, there is no crazy idea really, right? Like, and to your point, in some cases just existing in a certain country might sound crazy, but if it's part of your strategy, it's part of your mission, it's
yeah.
part of how you want to show up in the world, that's not crazy at all.
I like that. I always encourage the agencies that I work to try and scare me,
Mhm.
and to bring the biggest, boldest, maddest ideas. It's always so much easier to make one of those ideas a bit smaller than it is to take something that's a bit apologetic and a bit nice and make it bigger.
Yeah.
Um, Taming stuff is easier than waking it up, I
And to
guess.
that point, can you share something that you guys are working on that you're excited about at the moment?
So the podcast is going from strength to strength, and probably can't talk to you about what we're going to do with that,
Mhm.
but we're potentially going to be doing something exciting with that, that's beyond the podcast. Um, we had a very successful tour around the US last summer with the Grinder bus, and that was all about, again, really understanding what the community wanted from us. They wanted us to show up. The truth is that we have a reputation for not having great photography. We have lots of headless torsos, or we have no photos at all.
Hmm.
And people just wanted to interact more with the digital brand. So we created this bus, which was a photographic studio, and took it on tour all around the US. It sounds really simple, but it was really effective because the community loved it. We gave them something that they wanted, and we backed it up with all kinds of local data and insights and stuff that got great social and media traction. So we're taking that to Europe this summer, and we're going to be going all around the different prides in Europe, engaging with the community, talking to them, listening to them, and giving them something that they want, turning up in music festivals and all over the place. So actually taking a digital brand to real life and getting people to actually meet the team, interact with the team, but also give us an opportunity to listen to them. It's something that worked for us really well in the US, and I think will work for us really well in Europe, and something that we're all quite excited about pulling off.
Interesting. And so what does growth look like for Grindr? Since you're already in 192 countries and you're such an integral part of the community in so many different ways, what are some of your KPIs? What are you working towards these days?
The way that we think about our mission is slightly different in that we were very much in the past seen as being very mission first, almost to the detriment of the business. Now we're very much focused on growing the business and growing revenue, but going back to what I was talking about, putting Grindr on the map, again, we are increasingly being taken very seriously as a global player, and much as we are still cheeky and sexy and funny and naughty, um, we are a force to be reckoned with. So by us achieving our goals and through marketing helping us achieve those goals and us taking that place on the global stage, we will then become a beacon for the community. So that's what's so exciting about it. It's win-win from a business point of view, from a community point of view, from a growth point of view. There's so many things that we haven't even started to scratch the surface of yet. That's that's the trick. Spotting the opportunities and focusing on the right ones because there's so much excitement around here right now. Much as we're 16 years old, it really does. And I know a lot of places say this, but it really does feel like a startup at the moment, and there's a lot of excitement and a lot of great people here to make that come true.
That's wonderful. And I think like looking from the outside, obviously Grindr, you guys provide a service and that service varies depending on the situation, but at its core, it's also very much a storytelling company, isn't it? Like again, like as a way to build community, yes, but also to just show up in a way that is really adding something to that conversation, right? That conversation that, to your point, changes every day. Like that the neighborhood, as you said, like is constantly evolving, especially online. Storytelling is a huge a huge part of it. And storytelling, I don't mean just, podcasts that you mentioned, all that stuff, but even the way you guys use design, to me is a design company. Like you look at
Yep.
the visual identity is just so integral to the experience and everything that you guys do. And all those things to me just scream storytelling. So I really admire how you guys are able to just build the brand in a way that feels so unique and specific.
It's a great place to be. It's very
Mhm.
exciting, and to your point, it's and from a design point of view, also the sound. Our
Mhm.
sound is iconic, um, and so many places will just use our sound as an instantly recognizable moment of levity. It was on Eurovision uh, last year, where the presenter grabbed somebody's phone and the sound went off to huge hilarity. It went viral, and stuff like that. In terms of being in culture, in conversation, in people's minds, is just invaluable. So much more than a street full of billboards could ever do for us.
Love it. Um, Last question. I've been reading a lot of articles lately saying that New York is the worst city for dating at the moment. Does that show up in your data? Is that true? And what can people do
Uh,
about it?
Do you know, I don't think that is the case for our community, to be perfectly honest with you. I think Grindr is alive and very well in New York. It's one of our biggest markets, and people seem to be finding success. Uh, and whether it's on the first night or on the wedding night, they're getting good results.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tristan. Really appreciate you having this candid conversation with us and sharing some of your stories. So thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Mhm. Awesome. Kim, Scott, you guys feel good? I don't know if
Yes,
Scott is
that
there.
was awesome. I'm just gonna stop the recording.